Well, let's take you straight to Labour analyst Andrew Levy, who joins us on the line. Andrew, good evening to you. We are really stepping into what many have described as unprecedented territory. Government deciding that it will unilaterally go ahead with this 3% increase for workers. Unions are unhappy about how all of this has unfolded.
Yes, well, I think one expects that comment, and I'm sure the employers are equally unhappy. But I should say that the unhappiest of all are the citizens of this country. It looks as almost inevitable that there will be a strike unless there's a midnight intervention. It looks as if the gap is a large one, depending on how you do the arithmetic, and I can return to that a little bit later on. The union's effectively saying they'll take anything between 6.5 and 10, which is rather a strange position. Sounds as if they're looking for a face saver, and on that basis, perhaps government should offer them a face saver. But it is a test for government, and certainly if the strike goes ahead as it appears to do, I don't think it's going to be, completely solid. Not all the unions will strike, and not all the people in the unions will strike. And secondly, I don't think it will last for 2, 3, 4 weeks. I think it will be over probably in and around a week. If government move, it'll probably take 2 weeks into the third week before the workers start to trickle back to work. But either way, it is not a happy situation.
It takes place on what can be described as shaky ground in as far as the relations between government and unions are concerned. Let's talk about just what happens then to the concept and the idea of collective bargaining. When you have an increase of this nature being put on the table. And if we go back to the sequence of events, it was really the finance minister in that midterm budget that gave government's offer before unions had effectively agreed to it.
One of the things which is strange about public sector bargaining anywhere in the world is that the figure is always put in the interim budget or in the budget, and so this is in the public domain. So before you sit down and bargain, both parties really know what the number is. Now, whether there is some, shall we say, concealing of the real number, I can't say. But the interesting thing, of course, is the unilateral implementation. And, when an employer unilaterally implements, it really is a slap in the face for the union, because effectively what the employer is saying to the workers is, you don't need the union, here it is, and, you'll all be happy with it. And, of course, that means that tactically the union's got to come back with all its strength and get something better to prove that it can do a better job for its members. So it certainly raises the temperature. Equally, if we look at this particular dispute, and remember, we haven't had a large public sector strike. The last one was about 2011. We have a situation where there's been quite a lot of intervention and attempts to conciliate, and that is not met with any success. So it looks for the moment as if both parties are dug in, and it's probably a question of who blinks first. But while government and public sector are blinking at each other, civil population is going blind.
Andrew, I recall at the time that Eskom was facing its own industrial action, and this country being brought to the highest levels of of load shedding that we have seen in a long time. There was a conversation that we had about why it needs to get to the brink, literally, before things can move, and only for the employer to come back and give the workers what they have asked for.
That's a very good question, And, I think one must still make the point, if one looks at Eskom, that was an unprocedural strike. Eskom is an essential industry. They're not supposed to strike. So there was certainly a failure there, one way or the other. But I think inherent in the way that both parties approach bargaining, and, one really can't assign blame to one party or the other. Both parties must take responsibility, is it seems impossible to have a rational and honest discussion about what can and what can't be done. Now, obviously, any negotiation is full of bluff, and, you say that's my initial demand, and and the other party knows that you're going to settle for less. But nevertheless, when you move along and the moves get smaller and smaller, there is a signal there that there isn't much more to be had. And the sad thing, if you look at our pattern of industrial action, is that we get these strikes, and when return to work or the settlement takes place, it's for a very, very small amount. And you've really got to say, is this the best way to do it? Because on the one hand, the workers will never make up the wages they lose on a strike by 1/4 or 0.5% increase, but equally the loss to government and to the public, and particularly in the case of the public sector. I mean, we had Mr. Maluleki talking about there would be no burials without death certificates. People couldn't leave the country and enter the country. Well, I'm quite sure that a government will do what they can to keep such services running. But ultimately, of course, if we look at other things such as the sale and transfer of land and conveyancing of property, if you look at certain transactions financially which need to take place, all of these things aren't done, and then there's a huge backlog. So if we do have a strike, it's going to take a long time to recover.
Andrew, let's leave it there for tonight. Andrew Levy is a labor analyst.